Hey boys and girls, it's Mrs. Amato here. I'm bringing to you chapters 6 through 10 in Out of My Mind by Sharon Draper, one of the Reader's Rise selections. It's up against Wonder. Let's see what happens. Chapter 6 through 10. Oh, and thanks Simon & Schuster for allowing us to read this aloud. Miss Violet Valencia lives next door to us. Violets are purple and Valencia oranges are, well, orange. Purple oranges are just plain unusual, and so is she. She's a big woman, about 6 feet tall, with the biggest hands I've ever seen. They're huge. I bet she could put a full-size basketball in each of her palms and still have room left over. If Miss V is like a tree, then my mom is a twig next to her. I was about 2 years old when I first started hanging out at Mrs. V's house. Mom and Dad hardly left me with anybody at first, but sometimes their work schedules would overlap, and they needed a third person to help out. Mom said Mrs. V was the very first visitor when I first came home from the hospital. The first person to just pick me up like any other baby. A lot of my parents' friends had been scared to even touch me, but not Mrs. V. Mrs. V wears huge, flowing dresses. Must be miles of material in those things, all in crazy color combinations. Bubblegum pink, with fire engine red, with peachy sherbet, with bright cinnamon, and all shades of orange and purple, of course. She told me she makes the dresses herself. I guess she'd have to. I've never seen anything like them in any store in the mall, or in a hospital either. Mrs. V and Mom used to work together as nurses in the hospital. Mom told me the children there had been crazy about her. She wore the same bright outfits in the preemie ward, the kids' cancer ward, the children's burn unit. Color brings life and hope to these children, she'd announce boldly, daring anybody to disagree. I guess nobody did. I remember sitting on Mrs. V's porch that very first time. Mom and Dad looked concerned, but Mrs. V held me tightly and bounced me on her knees. She must have a hidden microphone under those flowing clothes. She has one of those voices that can make anybody shut up, turn, and listen. Of course I'll watch Melody, she'd said with certainty. Well, Melody is, really special, Dad said hesitantly. All kids are special, Mrs. V had replied with authority, but this one has hidden superpowers. I'd love to help her find them. We can't possibly pay you for what this is worth to us, Dad began. Mrs. V shrugged and said with a smile, I'll appreciate whatever you can give me. My dad looked sheepish. Well, thanks. And I'll get that ramp finished this weekend. I just need to make one more trip to the lumberyard. Now that will be a big help, Mrs. V had said with a nod. Melody can be a handful, Mom had warned. Mrs. V lifted her up in the air. I've got big hands. We want her to reach her highest potential, Dad added. Oh, gag me, Mrs. V said, startling him. Don't get bogged down in all those touchy-feely words and phrases you read in books on disabled kids. Melody is a child who can learn and will learn if she sticks with me. Dad looked embarrassed, but then he grinned. Bring her back in 20 years. You'll have her back home by supper time. So most work days, I'd ended up at Miss Valencia's place for a couple of hours until Mom or Dad could get home. When I got older, I went over to Mrs. V's every afternoon after school. I don't know how much they paid her, but it couldn't have been enough. From the very beginning, Mrs. Valencia gave me no sympathy. Instead of sitting me in the special little chair my parents had brought for me, she plopped me on my back in the middle of a floor on a large, soft quilt. The first time she did that, I looked up at her like she was crazy. I cried, I screeched. She ignored me, walked away, flipped on her CD player. Loud marching band music blared through the room. I liked it. Then she came back and put my favorite toy, a rubber monkey, a few inches from my head. I wanted that monkey. It squeaked when you touched it, but it may as well have been a million miles away. I was on my back, stuck like a turtle. I screamed louder. Mrs. V sat down on the quilt, Turn over, Melody, she said quietly. Sometimes she can make her voice really soft. I was so shocked. I stopped yelling. I couldn't turn over. Didn't she know that? Was she nuts? She wiped my nose with a tissue. You can turn yourself over, Melody. I know you understand every word I say to you, and I know you can do this. Now roll. Actually, I'd never bothered to try very hard to roll anywhere. I'd fallen off the sofa a couple times and it hurt. So I usually just waited for Mom and Dad, or Dad, to move me to a comfortable position. Look at how you're lying. You're already on your side, halfway there. Use all that screaming and hollering energy you've got to take you to the another position. Toss your right arm over and concentrate. So I did. I strained, I reached, I tried so hard. Mrs. V cracked up. But slowly, I felt my body rolling to the right, and then unbelievably, plop, I was on my stomach. I was so proud of myself, I screeched. I told you so, Mrs. V said, victory in her voice. Now go get that monkey. I knew better than to protest, so I reached for it. The monkey was now only 2 inches from my hand. I tried to scoot. My legs kept doing the opposite of what my head wanted them to do. I wiggled, I grabbed a fistful of quilt and pulled. The monkey got closer. You're a smart little cookie, Mrs. V said. I gave the quilt another tug, and finally, gradually, I had the monkey in my hand. I clutched it, and it squeaked as if it were glad to see me. I grinned and made it squeak again and again. After that workout, you must be hungry, she said. She fed me a vanilla milkshake first, then my vegetables and noodles. Mrs. Valencia always serves dessert first, and I always eat all my food. The healthy part, and the yummy part too. It's our secret. Mrs. V is the only person who lets me drink soda, Coke, Sprite, Tahitian treat. I love the nose-tickling burp. Mom and Dad mostly give me milk and juice. Mellow Yellow is my favorite. Mrs. V even started calling me that. At Mrs. V's house, I learned to scoot and then to crawl. I'd never win a baby crawling contest, but by the time I was 3, I had learned how to get across a room. She made me figure out how to flip myself over from front to back and back to front again. She was tough on me. She let me fall out of my wheelchair onto pillows so I could learn how best to catch myself. Suppose somebody forgets to fasten that seatbelt of yours, she said in a voice that sounded like she was chewing gravel. You better know what to do, or your head will bust wide open. I didn't want a busted head, so we practiced. She'd send me back home, tell Mom I had a good dinner and a good poop. I have no idea why parents think that's so important. Then wink at me. I was like her secret mission. Once I started school, however, I discovered a much bigger problem than just falling out of my chair. I needed words. How was I supposed to learn anything if I couldn't talk? How was I supposed to answer questions or ask questions? I knew a lot of words, but I couldn't read a book. I had a million thoughts in my head, but I couldn't share them with anybody. On top of that, people didn't really expect the kid in H5 to learn much anyway. It was driving me crazy. I couldn't have been much more than 6 when Mrs. V figured out what I needed. One afternoon after school, after a snack of ice cream with caramel sauce, she flipped through the cable channels and stopped at a documentary about some guy named Stephen Hawking. Now, I'm interested in almost anything that has a wheelchair in it. Duh. I even like the Jerry Lewis telethon. Turns out, Stephen Hawking has something called ALS. He can't walk or talk, and he's probably the smartest man in the whole world, and everybody knows it. This is so cool. I bet he gets really frustrated sometimes. After the show went off, I got real quiet. He's like you, sort of, isn't he? Mrs. V asked. I pointed to yes on the board, on my board, then pointed to no. I don't follow you, she scratched her head. I pointed to need on my board, then to read. Need, read, need, read. I know you can read lots of words, Melody, Mrs. V said. I pointed again. More. I could feel tears coming. More, more, more. Melody, if you had to choose, which would you rather be able to do, walk or talk? Talk, I pointed to my board. I hit the word again and again. Talk, talk, talk. I have so much to say. So Miss V made it her mission to give me language. She ripped all the words off of my communication board and started from scratch. She made the new words smaller so more could fit. Every single space on my talking board got filled with names and pictures of people in my life, questions I might need to ask, and a big variety of nouns and verbs and adjectives. So I could actually compose something that looked like a sentence. I could ask, "Where is my book bag?" or "Happy birthday, Mom," just by pointing with my thumb. I have magic thumbs, by the way. They work perfectly. The rest of my body is sort of like a coat with the buttons done up in the wrong holes. But my thumbs came out with no flaws, no glitches, just my thumbs. Go figure. Every time Mrs. V would add new words, I learned them quickly, used them in sentences, and was hungry for more. I wanted to read. So she made flashcards. Pink for nouns, blue for verbs, green for adjectives. Piles and piles of words. I learned to read little words like fish and dish and swish. I like rhyming words. They're easy to remember. It's like a buy one, get the rest free sale at the mall. I learned big words like caterpillar and mosquito, and words that follow crazy rules like knock and gnome. I learned all the days of the week, months of the year, all the planets, oceans, continents. Every single day I learned new words. I sucked them in and gobbled them up like they were Mrs. V's cherry cake. And then she would stretch the cards on the floor, position me on a big pillow so I could reach them, and I'd push the cards into sentences with my fists. It was like stringing the beads of a necklace together to make something really cool. I tried to make her laugh, so I'd put the words into wacky order sometimes. The bluefish will run away. He does not want to be dinner. She also taught me words for all the music I'd heard at home. I learned to tell the difference between Beethoven and Bach, between a sonata and a concerto. She'd pick a selection on a CD and then ask me the composer. Mozart. I'd point to the correct card from choices she'd set in front of me. Then I'd point to the color blue on my board. Huh? She asked. When she played a selection from Bach, I'd point to the correct composer, then once again touch the color blue on my board. I also touched purple. She looked confused. I searched around for the right words to explain what I meant. I wanted her to understand that music was colorful when I heard it. I finally realized that even Mrs. V couldn't figure out everything in my head. We kept going. Sometimes she'd play hip-hop music, sometimes oldies. Music and the colors it produced flowed around her as easily as her clothing. Mrs. V took me outside in all kinds of weather. One day she actually let me sit outside in the rain. It was steaming hot, and I was sticky and irritable. It must have been about 90 degrees outside. We were sitting on her porch, watching the clouds storm together. She told me the names of all the clouds and made up stories about them. I knew that later she'd have the names of every kind of cloud on word cards for me. Big old Nimbus up there. He's black and powerful and can blow all the other clouds out of the sky. He wants to marry Miss Cumulus Cloud, but she's too soft and pretty to be bothered with such a scary guy. So he gets mad and he makes storms, she told me. Finally, old Nimbus got his way, and the rain came down around me and Mrs. V. It rained so hard I couldn't see past the porch. The wind blew, and the wet coolness of the rain washed over us. It felt so good. A small leak on Mrs. V's porch let a few drops of rain fall on my head. I laughed out loud. Mrs. V gave me a funny look, then hopped up. "You want to feel it all?" she asked. I nodded my head. Yes, yes, yes. She rolled me down the ramp Dad had built, both of us getting wetter every second. She stopped when she got to the grass, and we let the rain drench us. My hair, my clothes, my eyes and arms and hands, wet, wet, wet. It was awesome. The rain was warm and almost like bath water. I laughed and laughed. Eventually, Miss V rolled me back up the ramp and into the house, where she dried me off, changed my clothes, and gave me a cup of chocolate milk. She dried off my chair, and by the time Dad came to pick me up, the rain had stopped and everything was dry once more. I dreamed of chocolate clouds all night. Chapter 7. When I sleep, I dream. And in my dreams, I can do anything. I get picked first on the playground for games. I can run so fast. I take gymnastics and I never fall off the balance beam. I know how to square dance and I'm good at it. I call my friends on the phone and we talk for hours. I whisper secrets. I sing. When I wake up in the morning, it's always sort of a letdown as reality hits me. I have to be fed and dressed so I can spend another long day in the happy face room at Spalding Street School. Along with the assortment of teachers we've had in room H5, there have been more classroom aides than I can count. These aides, usually one guy to help with the boys and one lady to help with the girls, do stuff like take us to the bathroom or change diapers on kids like Ashley and Carl, feed us lunch, wheel us where we need to go, wipe mouths, and give hugs. I don't think they get paid very much because they never stay very long, but they should get $1 million. What they do is really hard, and I don't think most folks get that. It's even hard to keep good teachers for us. I guess I don't blame them for leaving because, like I said, we're a tough bunch to handle sometimes. But once in a while, we get a good one. After squeaky Miss Hyatt for kindergarten and game show Mr. Gross for first grade, Miss Tracy breezed into our room for second grade. She figured out I liked books, so she got some earphones and hooked me up with audiobooks on CD. She started with baby stuff like Dr. Seuss, which my father and I had read when I was 2. So after I tossed those on the floor a couple times, instead of punishing me, she figured out I needed something better. I listened to all the Babysitter Club books and these goofy Goosebump books. She asked me questions after each book, and I got every single question right. Things like, which of these helped to solve the mystery? Then she'd show me a pebble, a starfish, and an ink pen. The pebble, of course. She'd cheer after we'd gone through the questions and then hook me up to another book. That year, I listened to all the books by Beverly Cleary and all the books about those boxcar kids. It was awesome. The next year, it all unraveled. I know teachers are supposed to write notes to the next teacher in line so they know what to expect, but either Miss Tracy didn't do it or Mrs. Billups, our third grade teacher, didn't read them. Mrs. Billups started every morning by playing her favorite CD. I hated it. Old MacDonald Had a Farm, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and the Itsy Bitsy Spider. All sung by children who could not sing. The type of music grown-ups think is cute, but it's awful. Miss Billups put it on at full volume every single morning, over and over and over. No wonder we were always in a bad mood. Once she had the Tin Pan Band on, Miss Billups went over the alphabet every single day with third graders. Now, children, this is an A. How many of you can say A? Good. She'd smile and say good, even if nobody in the class responded. I wonder if she would teach able-bodied third graders the same way. Probably not. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Now, let's move on to B. This is the letter B. Let's all say B. Good. Again to silence. She didn't seem to care. I glanced with longing at the books on tape and the earphones, which had been shoved into a corner. One day, I guess I'd had enough. Miss Billups had expanded from saying the letters to making the sounds of each one. Buh, she said loudly, spitting a little as she did. Buh is the sound of the letter B. Let's all say buh together, children. Then Maria, who is always in a good mood, started throwing crayons. Willie began to babble, and I bellowed. I may not be able to make clear sounds, but I can make a lot of noise. I screamed because I hated stuff that was just plain stupid. I screeched because I couldn't talk and to tell her to shut up. And that made me cry because I'd never be able to tell anybody what I was really thinking. So I screamed and yelled and shrieked. I cried like a 2-year-old. I would not stop. And my tornado explosion took over. I flailed and jerked and basically spazzed out. I kicked so hard that my shoes popped out of the foot straps on my chair. That made me tilt to one side and I screamed even louder. Mrs. Billups didn't know what to do. She tried to calm me down, but I didn't want to be calmed. Even the aides couldn't stop me. Jill and Maria started to cry. Even Ashley, dressed all in yellow that day, looked upset. Freddie spun around in his chair in circles, glancing sideways at me fearfully. Carl hollered for lunch, then he pooped his pants again. The whole class was out of control, and I kept screeching. The teacher called Mrs. Anthony, the principal, whose eyes got wide as she opened the door. She took one look at the situation and said tersely, "Call her mother." She could not have left more quickly. A moment later, the teacher had my mother on the phone. "Mrs. Brooks, this is Melody's teacher, Anastasia Billups. Can you come to school right away?" I knew my mother had to be worried. Was I sick, bleeding, dead? "No, she's not ill. She's fine, we think," Mrs. Billups said. "We just can't get her to stop screaming. She's got the whole class in an uproar." I could picture my mother on the other end of the line, trying to figure out what was going on. Luckily, it was her day off. I knew she'd be there in a few minutes, so I gradually calmed down and I finally shut up. The other kids quieted down as well, like somebody had clicked off a switch. Old MacDonald continued to play. My mother arrived faster than I thought possible. When I saw her jeans and dirty sweatshirt, I realized she dropped everything and jumped in the car. She ran over to me and asked what was wrong. I took a few deep, shuddering breaths, then I pointed to the alphabet on my talking board and screeched some sounds of frustration. "This is about the alphabet?" my mother asked. "Yes," I pointed to the word. She turned to Miss Billups. "What were you working on when all of this started?" "We were reviewing the alphabet, of course, the sound of the letter B, if I recall. Buh. I always started with the basics. These children need constant review because they don't retain information like the rest of us." My mother was getting the picture. "So you were going over the ABCs, correct? It's February." "I beg your pardon? School started in August. You haven't gotten past the letter B in 6 months?" Mom was balling and unballing her fists. I've never seen my mother hit anything, but when I see her doing that, I always wonder, will she? Or if she might. "Who are you to tell me how to run my class?" the teacher asked angrily. "And who are you to bore these children with mindless activities?" my mother snapped. "How dare you?" the teacher gasped. "I dare anything for my daughter," Mom replied, her voice dangerous, "and for the rest of these children." "You don't understand," the teacher began. Mom interrupted her. "No, Miss Billups, it is you who does not understand." Mom looked like she was trying to calm herself down because she then said, "Look, have you ever said to yourself, if they show that stupid commercial on TV one more time, I think I'll just scream?" Miss Billups nodded slowly. "Or, if I have to sit for 5 more minutes in this traffic jam, I'll simply explode." "Yes, I suppose," she admitted. "Well, I think that's what happened to Melody," she said to herself. "If I have to go over those letters one more time, I'll just scream." So she did. I really don't blame her, do you? Miss Billups looked from my mother to me. "I guess not now that you explain it that way," Miss Billups finally said, her voice now as calm as my mother's. "Melody knows her alphabet, all the sounds of all the letters and hundreds of words on sight. She can add and subtract numbers in her head. We discussed all of this at our last parent conference, didn't we?" I could tell my mother was trying to control her temper. "I thought you were exaggerating," the teacher said. "Parents are not always realistic when it comes to these children." "If you call them these children one more time, I might scream," my mother warned. But Melody does have mental and physical limitations, Miss Billups argued, trying to put Mom in her place. I guess you have to learn to accept that. And the fire was back. Melody can't walk, Melody can't talk, but she is extremely intelligent. And you better learn to accept that, Mom spat out. The teacher backed up an inch or two. Didn't you read her records from last year, Mom demanded. Melody loves listening to books on tape. I try to approach each child with an open mind and not be influenced by other teachers. All the records are in a box someplace. Maybe you should find that box, my mother said. Well, I never, Miss Billups countered. Maybe that's your problem, Mom replied with a grin. Then she tilted her head and turned toward the CD player. Oh, one more thing. May I see that wonderful CD you're playing? Miss Billups smiled a little. Of course, the children love this. Do they? Mom asked. The teacher lifted the disc from the player. Twinkle, twinkle, silence. Willie sighed out loud. Mom took the CD, dug in her purse for a moment, gave Miss Billups a $5 bill, and deftly snapped the CD in half. That music was cruel and unusual punishment. Freddie and Maria cheered. Gloria whispered, "Thank you." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for Miss Billups. She looked so confused. She just didn't get it. Mom walked over to the sink in our room, turned on the water, and soaked a stack of paper towels under the faucet. She came back to me and gently wiped my face with a warm, soggy wad. Nothing had ever felt so soothing. She then brushed my hair, adjusted the straps and buckles on my chair, gave me a quick hug, and went home. Mrs. Billups quit her job after spring break, so we ended up with a series of subs till the end of the year. I think she had it figured it would be easy to work with people who were dumber than she was. She was wrong. That's the end of chapter 7. In just a minute, we will start chapter 8.